Hello to my fellow anatomists. I am Dr. Wojciech Pawlina, Professor and Chair of Anatomy at Mayo Clinic, College of Medicine. At this time, in November 2011, I am interviewing Dr. Stephen Carmichael, Professor Emeritus of Anatomy and Orthopedic Surgery at Mayo Clinic, College of Medicine. And this is at the request of American Association of Anatomists for their Living History project. Stephen, I know that you led an interesting life. And why don't you start from the beginning?
Okay. Well, the beginning would be the day I was born, which happened to be the day after the first atomic bomb was exploded. And here's a semi-true story. The second bomb, which people are familiar with because it's associated with Hiroshima, was called Little Boy. And the third bomb associated with Nagasaki was called Fat Boy. But the first atomic bomb was called Little Boy. And President Truman, who was in Potsdam with Joseph Stalin carving up Europe, got a coded message that said, "Baby boy is born." And most historians think that that means that bomb was successfully exploded, but actually he was following my mother's pregnancy. So that's how things got started.
Did you have any early interest in science?
Ever since I can remember, I wanted to be a biologist, and I feel very fortunate that I've been able to make a career as a biologist.
And what was your education? Can you?
Well, I went to Thomas Downey High School in Modesto, California, which is interesting because one of the guys in my school made a movie kind of about it called American Graffiti, and that was a pretty popular movie. His third movie was more popular. It's called Star Wars, but I did get to go to high school with George Lucas, which was something interesting. And then I went to Kenyon College. And the reason I went to Kenyon College is they had a very strong program in biology and also strong team sports in swimming. And I swam competitively since I was 8 years old through college. And one of the most interesting things about my swimming career, which wasn't very stellar, but I did beat Mark Spitz once when I was 13. So not many people can say they beat Mark Spitz. He continued to improve. I didn't, and the rest is history.
That's a great story. How did you become interested in anatomy, in the broad spectrum of anatomical sciences?
Well, as I said, I always wanted to be a biologist, and my mentor at Kenyon College, Dr. Yao, made me aware of PhD programs in anatomy, and he just thought I would be better suited for that than a biology program. And certainly in retrospect, he made the right call. So it was my mentor in college.
And what did influence you to go to graduate school?
Again, it was Dr. Yao, and he knew some people at Tulane University that had a large training grant program at the time. And I was fortunate to get a grant to go to Tulane University in New Orleans.
Probably you had some memorable experiences and memories from graduate school.
I did. I had a great time as an undergraduate at Kenyon and in graduate school at Tulane. We were in a large group of people. I think there were 11 of us entering in 1967, and many of us are still good friends. But I think the most interesting thing is I actually created another student. We had distinguished people like Russell Woodburn and John Basmajian come in and give seminars, and all the students had to write a review of the seminar. And so each week or each time it was time to submit one of these reviews, I would submit one as Stephen Carmichael, and I'd submit another one as Tom Tricycle. So Tom Tricycle became another graduate student in our program, and the department chair and other faculty members just went crazy trying to find out who Tom Tricycle was, because his reviews were a bit irreverent. But anyway, everyone I went to graduate school knows about Tom Tricycle.
That's a great story. At what academic institutions have you held faculty appointments?
Well, not many, because when I graduated from Tulane in 1971, I went to West Virginia University, had a terrific 11 years there, again working with some terrific people, and then in 1982 came to Mayo Clinic. The interesting thing about my being offered a job here is that when Mayo Medical School first started, there was no anatomy in the first year. It was a third-year elective, as you well know. And then the decision was made, for a lot of reasons, to make anatomy a first-year required program, just like it is in every other medical school. And that's when I was hired to come to Mayo, and I spent 25 years on staff and retired in 2007.
And I remember the day that you interviewed me for the position at Mayo Clinic. There was in, I believe, 1998.
Yes.
A cold morning, and you convinced me that the weather is similar in Florida than in Minnesota. Remember that?
Yeah, people think it was a hard sell getting you to come from Gainesville to Rochester, but I told you the weather's the same. You go in your climate-controlled house, to your climate-controlled car, to your climate-controlled office, and the weather's just like this all the time.
And I bought it. How many years have you been in the field of anatomy?
Well, since I graduated in '71, this is 2011, so 40 years, and they've been terrific years.
Can you tell us about some scientific accomplishment in this field?
My research area was on the adrenal medulla, or the adrenal chromaffin cell, and I had great success with that. I wrote several review books of the world's literature, and those were very popular before PubMed and computerized searches became so easy. So I did other people's literature searches for them. But in doing that, I could uncover holes in the literature where something needed to be done that involved morphology. And so then I'd do studies to answer these questions that I was able to uncover. So that worked out very well.
And as I remember, you pioneered some experiments that anatomists were involved in the clinical sort of outcomes and clinical surgeries.
Yeah, that was a particularly interesting time in the mid-'80s. There were some reports out of Mexico that autologous transplantation of the adrenal medulla to the brain, to the caudate nucleus specifically, relieved the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And patients would seemingly miraculously be able to walk and play soccer with their children and things like this. So very interesting. We were able to get permission to operate on 10 patients. And what's particularly interesting about this is that these studies were not conducted in animals first, because at that time there was no animal model for Parkinson's disease. So we did 8 patients. A surgeon would remove the right adrenal gland, and for you anatomists, you can appreciate that is more technically that's much more difficult, but it avoided the pancreas on the left side, which has additional complications. And then that adrenal gland would come to me and my wife, Susan Stoddard. Actually, she wasn't my wife at the time, but she's my strongest collaborator in these and other studies we did on the adrenal medulla. And we would separate, Susan and I would separate the cortex from medulla, and then a neurosurgeon would stereotaxically place them into the caudate nucleus of these patients. Now, we stopped the clinical trial at 8 because our patients were not experiencing this fabulous recovery reported by others. Importantly, though, is our patients did not get worse, which is significant because in these patients at their age, Parkinson's disease has a steady deterioration, and they weren't deteriorating, but they weren't getting better. So the decision was made to stop it at 8, but those were some exciting times.
Very exciting clinical trials. Tell me a little bit about your memorable publication. You publish a lot in your life, and it must be something that really you remember well.
Well, the article I'm most proud of was in Scientific American, and it's very hard to get published in Scientific American, but this is 1985. I worked with Hans Winkler, who was probably the leading person in the field of adrenal chromaffin cell. He's in Innsbruck, Austria. And we wrote this article, and I think it's read by more people than all the rest of my publications put together.
Piece of advice or your philosophy that you think is still relevant today?
Well, I've been fortunate to have some leadership positions as president of a couple of academic societies, and as you know, I was chair of the anatomy department for 14 years. And what I think is most important is being able to deal with other people, and the key to that is when you have differences as people, which is inevitable, try and see the other person's point of view and appreciate where they're coming from. And though I wouldn't necessarily change my point of view, if I could just appreciate the other person's point of view, I could expand my thinking and help to work with that person better. and that almost always was very effective.
Great advice. Do you have any advice for new researchers entering the field of anatomy, clinical anatomy, or similar discipline?
Well, I certainly, I'm not telling anyone anything new, but it's very difficult this day and age for a number of reasons, mostly economic. But just carefully pick something that interests you. If you're interested in education, that's a highly evolving field, and just work as hard as you can to pursue your interest, and then find a position where that fits, where you can make a contribution to an institution like you've made to Mayo Clinic, and hopefully I did too during my career. But just you need to publish, getting grants. Again, this is old news, but find what you like and do it well and do it a lot.
Sure. Over the many years of your career, anatomy and particularly education, anatomical science education, changed a lot.
It has.
Do you have any sort of insight or some future sort of directions, how it may look like in the future?
Well, we've gone from what we used to call the good old days, where we had a couple of hundred or even more contact hours with the students, to a much briefer number of contact hours. And anatomy is not just learning rote morphology or anatomy for anatomy's sake. It's come to include critical thinking skills, particularly applying anatomic knowledge to clinical situations, communication, team leadership, professionalism. You're one of the leaders in that particular area of developing professionalism early in the medical curriculum. So I think it's this more well-rounded physician, and not so much relying on the lecturer and books, but there are lots of web-based materials out there now. What I was hoping for is that computers would not replace cadavers while I was still active, and fortunately that's become true, but I think we're going to see more computer-based dissections now in the future. So I think computers are going to play a huge role in medical education.
You didn't mention your role as an editor-in-chief of Clinical Anatomy, and I think that's a huge thing that I feel you accomplished. And any thoughts on being editor-in-chief?
Well, it's been a terrific 11 years. I was appointed editor-in-chief in 2000, and our impact factor was, for those of you who know what it is, I won't explain it here, but our impact factor was 0.2, and now it's 1.3, so it's increased steadily. We had less than 100 submissions that first year. We have more than 500 already this year. It's just November, so the journal's grown a great deal. I'm going to be editor for one more year. My third and final term is coming up in about a year. So I'm really proud of the team I've assembled of associate editors. We've become an international journal, because it's not just the official journal of the American Association of Clinical Anatomists, but also the British Association, and now the Clinical Anatomists in Australia and New Zealand, their association, and the Anatomical Society of Southern Africa. So I like to say, just slightly tongue-in-cheek, that the sun never sets on clinical anatomy. We're borrowing that from the British Empire, but they don't have use for that anymore. But so we're borrowing that
Great
phrase.
Story. Do you see any difference in the papers that were submitted when you became the editor-in-chief or now?
Yeah.
Are they different subject, different topics, or any thoughts on it?
Well, the anatomy hasn't changed, but certainly the way we look at anatomy has changed. And by that I mean the imaging studies, CT, MRI, ultrasound, all this has evolved during the 25 years that clinical anatomy has been published. And we have a lot of papers that are more clinically directed towards minimally invasive procedures, for example, or special types of imaging that are subsets of those modalities that I mentioned earlier. So we've got clinical anatomy has actually gotten more clinical.
And I think under your leadership, you created the special issues, and I remember imaging issue, another issue. Any
Right.
thoughts? Any things that you can tell us about that?
These have become very popular. Our first one was on the Visible Human Projects, specifically the American one the one in China, the one in Korea. Then our second special issue, actually you were the guest editor, was on professionalism, which I think was the first basic science journal to cover that topic back in 2006, if I recall correctly. Yes. Then we've had some other special issues that have been very popular. Our next issue is going to be a special issue. So I hope this is a trend that continues even when I'm no longer editor-in-chief.
Mm-hmm. What are some other important things that you have done in life?
Well, outside my career, I'm proud of the fact that I have climbed Mount Kilimanjaro 3 times. My wife and I wrote a book about it. I don't want to plug the book, but it's a how-to book. I won't mention the name, but not many people, not many Americans anyway, have had the chance to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. We're both certified scuba divers, and we do get to travel all over the world to do scuba diving, which we like to do.
And I think you have an interest in photography.
I do, and right now it's underwater photography, which has its own challenges of combining the challenge of scuba diving with photography.
Mm-hmm. Then what is keeping you busy these days?
Well, traveling. I get invited to a lot of meetings. In a few weeks I'll be going to India. I was invited by the Anatomical Society of India to give a talk at their annual meeting. And then we'll go scuba diving in the Maldives after that. So it just gives you an idea how I like to combine professional activities with recreational ones. And the fact that it'll be in January in the Maldives, when I won't be in Rochester, Minnesota in January, is very convenient as well.
And the last question, dissect or dissect?
You know my trademark is getting our students to pronounce dissect correctly, because a vowel followed by a double S is short. And when they pronounce it the other way, which I can't even say myself, you said it, just like rubbing your nails on a blackboard. But I insist all of our students pronounce dissect correctly, and that's what we do in our lab. We dissect.
Yes, and I try to keep this tradition.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And
Steven.
thanks for
it was a
having me.
pleasure. Thank you very much.